Ellie and Endo, Episode 1, Room to Roam. Ellie sat by the window, arms crossed, watching the village of Levelton stir to life. Her mother bustled about the kitchen, her mother's DiaPal, the smothering bear named Hogs, always close by. The massive bear had always hovered over Ellie, constantly nudging her to check her glucose and eat at the right time.
Ellie, dear, did you check your levels?
Her mother asked for the third time that morning. Ellie groaned.
Yes, Mother. I always check my levels.
The smothering bear let out a deep approving hum and nudged Ellie again. Ellie swatted its oversized paw away.
Enough!
Her mother frowned but said nothing. The bear continued to hover. Ellie's fists clenched. With a deep breath, Ellie grabbed her satchel and stormed out the door. The open road stretched ahead, winding past hills and scattered trees. Ellie breathed in the freedom, relishing the quiet, until she felt the tug. Her cannular tubing had kinked. Groaning, she stopped and rolled her eyes. She unhooked her pump, muttering under her breath, as she prepared for a set change. Once completed, frustrated but determined, she continued on, only to be halted again. Another kink, another set change. Canular Kinkers, tiny, mischievous creatures that lurked unseen, were already causing trouble. She kicked the dirt in frustration.
Could you just leave me alone? For one day?
As Ellie prepared yet another set change, she heard a commotion in the bushes, a frantic squeaking sound. She followed the noise and found a tiny hypo-hogger hedgehog backed into a corner by Gluco Gremlins, sharp-toothed little creatures that thrived on unstable glucose levels. The hypo-hogger squealed and swiped its tiny paws, but the gremlins only cackled. Ellie didn't hesitate. Grabbing a nearby branch, she charged at the creatures.
Get away from him!
The gremlins shrieked and scattered into the woods. Ellie knelt beside the hedgehog, who stared up at her with round, grateful eyes. Around his tiny waist was a satchel of diabetes supplies. Ellie looked at the curled-up hogger.
Do you want to come with me?
Ellie asked. The tiny hypo-hogger nodded. Ellie and the hypo-hogger continued down the road. Ellie started to tell the hedgehog all about her life back home, but it wasn't long before the Gluco Gremlins returned, this time in larger numbers.
You've got to be kidding me.
Ellie muttered. She grabbed a fallen log, holding it like a club.
Why don't you pick on someone your own size?
The gremlins lunged and Ellie swung. She knocked two back, but more swarmed around her. Then, as if it couldn't get any worse, the Canular Kinkers returned, twisting at her tubing. She wasn't fighting long before her pump started to alarm.
Not now!
Ellie gritted her teeth. Her chest heaved. It was too much. Snatching up Hogs, she dove into a nearby ditch, tumbling into the mud. She pressed her back against the damp earth, her breath ragged. The Gluco Gremlins chattered above, searching for her. Then the ground beneath her shifted. Dark, clawed hands emerged from the dirt. Burnout Burrowers. The mole-like creatures whispered as they began to scurry around her.
Why fight?
They whispered.
It's all too much, isn't it? Just give up. Rest!
Ellie struggled, but exhaustion weighed her down. The burrowers piled the mud higher. She couldn't breathe. For the first time, she called for help. Even through the suffocating mud, Ellie heard a shout. Then the clash of metal, the screeching of retreating gremlins, the sound of a sword slicing through the air. Suddenly, a paw broke through the mud and grabbed her, pulling her up into the fading sunlight. You're safe now. Ellie blinked, coughing out dirt. A knight in armor and a positivity panda stood over her, the knight's warm smile beneath his battle-worn face. I am Ser Endo, and this is my DiaPal pads, he said, helping her to her feet. I am a knight from the healthcare professional headquarters. Of course, Ellie had heard of the HCP HQ and their elite knights, mages and rangers. She had always dreamed of becoming a ranger herself. I saw you beating back those Gluco Gremlins. That was impressive. You should come with us, Endo said. I'm looking for a new squire. What do you say? Ellie glanced down at her hogger, who nodded.
I say, where's our first adventure?
Endo chuckled.
Glucovale. They're being terrorized by a hypertroll. So what shall we call you two?
I'm Ellie, and this is...
Ellie paused for a moment and looked down at her hypo-hogger.
Hogs!
Ellie answered. The hedgehog smiled. So, Ellie, Endo, Hogs and Pad set off down the road toward Glucovale. Ellie learnt that even the strongest knights needed help, and help is always there to be found, even when you're in the darkest of places. Ellie and Endo, Episode 2, The Monster of Glucovale. In the quiet village of Glucovale, villagers whispered of a terrifying beast one that made the villagers feel dizzy and shake. When the healthcare professional headquarters, or HCPHQ, heard of the trouble, they sent Ser Endo, his clever squire Ellie, and their loyal DiaPals, Ellie's hypo-hogger hedgehog named Hogs, who carried her insulin and supplies, and Endo's positivity panda called Pads, whose positivity was always infectious. The team arrived as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the village. The frightened villagers were huddled in their homes, peeking out from behind curtains. The elder left his shelter to speak to them.
What happened here?
Ser Endo asked the trembling elder.
The monster comes from the old clinic, across the woods.
The elder whispered.
It's taken many of us. Beware.
Ellie tightened her grip on her bow.
We'll stop it.
Pads gave a determined huff to show his support, and so the team trekked through the woods towards the clinic. The clinic loomed ahead, its windows shattered, walls crumbling. The air smelled of old medicine and something sour. As they entered the old building, suddenly, Hogs let out a screech. Ellie turned just in time to see a hulking shape emerge from the shadows, glowing eyes, twisted limbs. It was a hyper-troll, or so Ellie thought. Without hesitation, Ellie loaded her bow with an insulin-infused arrow and let it fly. The arrow struck true, sinking into the beast's thick hide.
I got it.
Ellie cheered, but her victory was short-lived. The monster let out a bone-rattling roar and began to grow, its eyes flashing bright blue, its limbs swelling with strength.
Run, Ellie!
Endo shouted, pulling her back. They darted into a nearby corridor, breathing heavily. Ellie's mind raced.
Why didn't it work? That was infused with insulin.
Ser Endo shook his head.
It's not a hypertroll, it's a hypohydra. More insulin just makes it stronger. It must have been feeding on the leftover insulin here at the clinic. We need glucose to defeat it.
Ellie's eyes widened.
Glucose, of course.
Suddenly, the hypohydra appeared again in the hallway, casting a confusion charm. Endo put himself in the way of the spell, saving Ellie and Hogs from the effects. His eyes glazed over, and he staggered away into the fog of the building. Ellie scrambled to her feet, grabbing Hogs and diving into the next room.
Endo!
Ellie cried, but he didn't respond. It was up to her now. Ellie checked her hypo-hogger's bag, but she had forgotten to pack any glucose for the trip.
Darn, of all the times to forget my glucose.
They crept through the darkened clinic, avoiding the monster's heavy footsteps and low growls. Pads found them at the end of the hall and gestured them into an old supply storeroom. Just before the hypohydra made another pass in its patrol of the hallways, Pads pointed to a box hidden underneath a pile of old supplies. It was labeled glucose tabs.
Yes.
Ellie congratulated herself. She grabbed a handful, crushing them into a fine powder. She coated her arrow with the sparkling glucose and drew the arrow into her bow.
Let's finish this.
She whispered. Ellie stepped out into the hallway. The hypohydra spotted her instantly, roared, and began charging at her. Ellie stood firm, aimed carefully, and released. The glucose-infused arrow struck the beast's chest. It howled, shrinking and fading, until nothing remained but a faint, sweet scent in the air. Ser Endo blinked, the confusion charm lifting.
Ellie, you did it!
He said, as he emerged from the lifting fog. Ellie grinned.
No, we did it. And next time, I'll stop and think before I act. Now I know the difference between hyper and hypo.
Pads and Hogs shared a high five. The missing villagers also started to emerge from the fog. The team led them back to the village, where the people cheered. Glucovale was safe again, thanks to Ser Endo, Ellie, and their DiaPals. But Ellie knew the real victory was understanding that too much insulin causes hypoglycemia, while not enough insulin leads to hyperglycemia. Knowing the difference could save lives, in Glucovale and beyond. Ellie and Endo, Episode 3. The Stigma of Judgment Vale. The woods of Judgment Vale were silent, save for the soft crunch of leaves beneath the boots of Ser Endo and his squire Ellie. The sun filtered through the dense canopy, casting rays of light on the path ahead. Pads, the positivity panda, trotted beside Ser Endo, while Hogs, the tiny hedgehog carrying Ellie's insulin supplies, snuffled happily at her feet.
Almost there.
Ser Endo murmured, glancing at the map.
The village of Glycobrook isn't far now.
Ellie nodded, adjusting the strap of her bow, but just as she opened her mouth to respond, beep, beep, beep! A loud, shrill alarm pierced the peaceful woods. Ellie's glucose alarmer blared from her pouch, echoing off the trees. Birds shot from the branches, and even Hogs startled, rolling into a tiny ball. Ellie's cheeks flushed pink. She fumbled to silence the device, glancing nervously at Ser Endo.
I thought I had it under control.
She mumbled. Ser Endo's eyes darted around Judgment Vale's vast canopy. He sighed and gave her a reassuring smile.
No harm done, Ellie. That alarm is there to protect you.
But before Ellie could respond, a faint beep was heard in the distance. Then another beep echoed from behind them. Endo's smile turned into a concerned frown. Then beep, 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 louder and louder, all around them.
Embarrassing alarmers, run, Ellie!
Endo shouted, as the chorus of beeps continued around them. Ellie, Endo, Pads and Hogs all ran down the forest path. Embarrassing alarmers filled every branch, until suddenly the beep stopped. A deep, mocking laugh rumbled through the woods.
Turn it off,
growled a voice.
Isn't it embarrassing?
From the shadows emerged a hulking, warty figure, the taunting troll. Its beady eyes gleamed with mischief, and it lumbered closer, dragging a heavy club behind it.
Look at her!
The troll sneered.
Can't even walk through the woods without crying for help!
Ellie's heart pounded. She reached for her bow, but before she could nock an arrow, a slithering sound curled around her ears. From the undergrowth, a sinuous shape rose, the stigma snake. Its scales shimmered like oil, and its yellow eyes gleamed with malice.
You're different.
It hissed, circling Ellie.
People will always stare. They'll never see you as strong.
Ellie tried to steady her hands, but the words gnawed at her confidence. The more embarrassed she felt, the tighter the stigma snake coiled, its venom seeping into her thoughts. Ser Endo swung his sword at the taunting troll, but the creature's laughter only grew louder.
Can't even fight your own battles, squire!
The troll jeered, dodging Ser Endo's strikes. Pads tried to cheer Ellie up with a hopeful chuff, while Hogs nudged her foot gently. But Ellie's shoulders sagged under the weight of the monster's words.
Just leave me alone,
she whispered, Ellie's head between her knees. Just as the stigma snake reared back to strike, a bright flash of light burst from the treetops.
Hey, clueless!
Chirped a small, cheerful voice. From the branches leapt a buddykin, a tiny fox-like creature with bright eyes and a mischievous grin. It landed between Ellie and the monsters, tail flicking.
Why so glum?
The buddykin asked, winking at Ellie.
Alarms aren't embarrassing. They're battle cries. They keep you strong.
Ellie blinked, the buddykin's words cutting through the fog of doubt.
But they make me feel different.
Different?
The buddykin laughed.
Everyone's different. That's what makes us strong. Let's show these bullies what you're made of.
Ellie's grip on her bow tightened. She glanced at Pads and Hogs, their eyes filled with unwavering support. With a deep breath, she pulled out her glucose, correcting her levels. The stigma snake hissed, but Ellie stood tall.
I'm not ashamed,
she said firmly. She knocked an arrow infused with confidence and fired. The arrow struck the stigma snake's heart, dissolving it into mist. The taunting troll's laughter faltered.
Who's crying now?
Ellie teased, a grin spreading across her face, as she repelled the embarrassment back towards the taunting troll. Ser Endo chuckled, landing a solid blow to the troll's side. Together, they drove the beast back into the shadows. As the woods grew quiet again, Ellie turned to the buddykin.
Thank you,
she said softly. The buddykin shrugged.
Everyone needs a little help sometimes.
Ser Endo placed a hand on Ellie's shoulder.
Remember, your alarms are part of your strength. They help you fight smarter, not weaker.
Ellie smiled, feeling lighter. As they continued their journey, she realized that needing support didn't make her any less capable. It made her wiser and stronger. And from that day forward, the sound of her alarmer no longer felt embarrassing. It was a reminder that she was prepared, protected, and never alone. Everyone faces challenges, and sometimes we need a little help, whether it's from friends, family, or even a trusty buddykin. There's no shame in using tools that keep you safe and strong. Embrace your journey, alarms and all. Ellie and Endo. Episode 4. The Quack Doctor of Glycobrook. The town of Glycobrook bustled with life. Merchants called from their stalls, villagers hurried about their errands, and the scent of fresh bread and sizzling meats filled the air. Ellie and Ser Endo had just arrived. Their journey through Judgment Vale had been testing and tiring.
I need to see the town council about supplies and somewhere to rest,
Ser Endo said, adjusting his sword belt.
Stay nearby, Ellie. I won't be long.
Ellie nodded, but as Endo and Pads disappeared into the crowd, she felt an unease settle in. All around her, judging goblins whispered and watched. Their narrow eyes followed her every move, their hushed voices murmuring behind clawed hands. They could sense Ellie was different. She pulled her cloak tighter, walking briskly through the market square, past stalls filled with shining trinkets, exotic fruits, and worn-out books. But no matter where she turned, the goblins' judging gazes never left her. Hogs had a hard time keeping up as he was almost squashed by every busy townsfolk that rushed towards them. Feeling exposed and overwhelmed, Ellie ducked into a quieter part of town, where the buildings were cracked and shadows loomed taller. The noise of the market faded, replaced by the drip of water from moss-covered gutters and the occasional scurry of unseen creatures.
You seem troubled, young one.
A voice cooed from the shadows. Ellie turned to see a figure step from the alleyway. A man dressed in a long white coat, his head eerily duck-like with small round glasses perched on his bill. His eyes gleamed with knowing amusement.
I am Dr. Quackers, renowned healer of ailments most distressing.
He said with a flourish.
And you, my dear, look like you seek a cure.
Ellie hesitated.
A cure? For what?
The quack doctor tutted.
For your burden, of course. Why suffer needles, medicines, and beeping machines when I can offer you true freedom? A miracle cure. Follow me, and I shall grant you relief beyond your wildest dreams.
Ellie's heart pounded.
A cure?
She glanced around. No more goblins, no more judging eyes. The promise of a cure had her follow him in an instant. The quack doctor's clinic was tucked into the side of a crumbling old tower. Inside, the air was thick and humid, filled with the scent of dried herbs and something sweetly metallic. Candles flickered, illuminating shelves lined with bottles of purple goo labeled with stigma snake oil.
Drink this and your troubles shall fade,
the quack doctor said, handing Ellie a vial filled with a thick, shimmering liquid. Ellie hesitated.
No more pricking fingers, no more counting, no more fear.
Ellie stared at the bottle. Her mind screamed, this is too good to be true. But the whispers of the goblins, the years of struggle, the desperate hope, all of it made her take a sip. Her body betrayed her instantly. A searing pain shot through her veins. Her head spun and her breath turned shallow. She collapsed onto a cot, her vision blurring. Around her, she could now see them. Other patients, pale, weak, barely able to lift their heads. The quack doctor only smiled.
Healing takes time, my dear.
Hogs, Ellie's DiaPal, who had been watching from the shadows. The moment Ellie collapsed, the tiny hedgehog bolted from the clinic and into the streets, squeaking urgently. Pads, still waiting with Ser Endo, was the first to notice something wrong. Endo, still speaking to the innkeeper, raised his head to see Hogs tumble into the inn.
Hogs?
He puzzled. Hogs jumped and gestured, but Endo had no idea what he was trying to say. Although he knew something was wrong, Hogs and Pads then bolted out of the door. Endo grabbed his things and swiftly followed. Hogs frantically led them back, weaving through alleyways until they reached the Clinic of Lies. Endo's face turned to worry as he charged up the old tower, reaching the clinic's door. Ser Endo kicked open the door, sword drawn.
Ellie!
He cried. The quack doctor barely had time to turn before Endo was through the door. The cowardly fraud fled through a hatch in the floor, sliding down a long ladder before disappearing into the sewers beneath Glucovale. Hogs found Ellie in one of the off-rooms and squealed. Endo rushed to Ellie's side. She was cold, her breathing shallow.
She needs real medicine.
Endo muttered, reaching for his satchel.
Hogs, bring me her supplies.
The hedgehog scurried to her pack, dragging out her insulin and emergency kit. With practiced precision, Endo administered Ellie's insulin and meds. Slowly, colour returned to Ellie's face. The other patients, weak, but watching, groaned and croaked.
All these people are in DKA, they need insulin. This quack doctor could have killed them all.
Endo said firmly. Ellie sat up groggily.
I should have known better.
Endo placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder.
Even the strongest warriors can fall for false promises when they're vulnerable.
Pads and Hogs helped the other patients. As Endo and Ellie stepped outside into the golden light of the evening, Ellie took a deep breath.
Next time, I won't let desperation cloud my judgment. Should we try and catch that quack doctor before he escapes?
Endo shook his head.
There will always be someone offering false promises. Our best defense is to educate ourselves and resist the draw of desperation. There are many false cures out there, promising quick fixes and miracle treatments for diabetes. But real medicine is backed by science. Trust in your healthcare team. Never fall for scams, no matter how convincing they may seem.
Ellie and Endo, Episode 5. The Guessing Gamer of Calculus Cave. The town square of Glycobrook was in chaos. The mayor, a portly man with a nervous twitch, wrung his hands as he explained the predicament to Ser Endo and Ellie.
It's the guessing gamer,
the mayor said, his voice laced with desperation.
It's ruining everything. People can't count their food right, they're miscalculating their doses, and it's turning mealtime into a disaster. We need you to stop it.
Ser Endo nodded solemnly.
Then we shall travel to Calculus Cave and put an end to its tricks.
Ellie adjusted her satchel, already feeling the weight of the challenge ahead.
I suppose we're about to be tested.
The path to the cave was long and winding, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. Hogs trotted beside Ellie, his tiny satchel filled with emergency supplies. Pads padded alongside Ser Endo, his ever-watchful eyes scanning the horizon. When they reached the entrance, a gust of cool air blew past them. The cave mouth yawned wide, and beyond the darkness, faint symbols glowed on the walls. The first chamber was vast, its floor covered in massive stone tiles. A glowing inscription hovered before them.
Only those who can count may pass. What does that mean?
Asked Ellie. Endo's gaze was locked on a set of symbols that glowed above them. It looked like plates of food. A disembodied voice chuckled.
Count the carbs. Choose wisely.
Ellie and Endo exchanged a glance.
We need to estimate the carb counts of each meal and step onto the tile with the correct answer.
Endo deduced. The first symbol glowed red. It was a plate of what looked like pasta. Ellie sighed.
You know, this isn't a very fun game, right?
The distant voice laughed. Suddenly, the flap of feathers came from behind them, landing on a nearby stone, a calculator owl. The wise owl in his waistcoat prepared himself to speak.
I am Professor Hootsworth, at your service, sir.
I'm glad headquarters sent you. We need your help.
Ser Endo said. The wise owl carefully calculated the carbs of each symbol and plotted a path across the tiles. They carefully tallied their choices, stepping forward only when confident in their answers. The tiles held firm, and soon the first trial was passed.
No matter, you'll never guess my next game.
The distant voice angrily snapped. The next chamber contained 3 doors. Above each door a symbol of a different food. One contained a slice of cheese, another a piece of fruit, and the third a piece of bread.
One of these contains little to no carbs. Choose correctly or face the consequence.
Immediately, Pads walked towards the door with the fruit symbol above it.
Stop!
Ellie cried. Ellie hesitated for only a moment before stepping towards the door with the cheese symbol above it.
We know it's not bread. It must be this one.
There was a nervous pause as Ellie opened the door. The ground rumbled, then settled. The answer was correct. Finally, the lair of the guessing gamer was in sight. The creature sat upon a throne of shifting numbers, its wide grin stretching unnaturally. It had flickering, unreadable eyes and a long tail that seemed to scribble random calculations into the air.
Welcome, challengers. Let's play a game.
This is no game. You are distressing the people of Glycobrook.
The guessing gamer's tail flicked, and the chamber's floor shifted, and suddenly, numbers began appearing above their heads. Blood sugar levels, changing at random. The team tried to move forward but kept being pushed up and down by the changing floor. The creature's tail was drawing different foods. The calculator owl squawked.
I will count the carbs, analyze the patterns and predict the movement.
The owl started to relay the numbers. Ellie narrowed her eyes, focusing. She started to predict the level of the floor, stepping forward, knowing where the level would be as she placed her foot. Finally, at the throne, she lunged forward, grabbing the guessing gamer's tail. The guessing gamer gasped as the chaos in the room halted.
No, you solved my game.
With a final flicker, the monster let out a wail and disappeared in a puff of smoke. As they exited the cave, the town of Glycobrook stood waiting, eager to hear the news. On arrival back at the town square, Ser Endo readied himself to make an announcement.
The guessing gamer is gone. Although he made you feel like diabetes is a guessing game, knowledge, preparation and understanding will help you level your numbers and defeat the guessing gamer's tricks.